So I think there's some sort of excos out there that are saying, "Oh, hang on a minute, is this safe enough for us to use?" What would be your answer to that, and to your response in terms of maybe what you've seen work in group, and then what you're deploying to customers?
You've made a few points, and I don't know which one to start with, right?
Sorry, I've got a habit of that. I do apologize.
No, it's fine. I think one of the concepts that a lot of individuals and even nations don't seem to consider or think about is the concept of AI sovereignty and what it actually means, right? And that if you think about the concept of sovereignty, it speaks to what extent can a nation utilize its natural assets to gain competitive edge, whether it is economically or in the socioeconomic space, right? So that means that to what extent do we understand what data we are generating as a nation? So similar to gold, as an example, in the South African landscape, we're rich in minerals. We understand we've got the rich data, but we then outsource the processing of the data to international organizations, and then we buy finished products. So in the AI space, I think if we don't speak enough about the concept of sovereignty AI, we then stand the chance of being colonized in the AI space, which means that in as much as we are generating our data, that is where the oil is, in inverted commas. If we then outsource the processing and management of that data, we are literally outsourcing future capability to external companies and external nations. As you can imagine, the concept of decolonization is something that takes generations to undo. And so then in the data space, one of the things we then need to consider as a nation and organizations is how do we protect ourselves from that potential risk of understanding from an infrastructure perspective, when our data is created, who gets to actually own it and manage it and maintain it, right? Because them, whoever them is, if it's an external, in this case, non-South African entity, we're almost empowering them to be able to colonize us. What that also means is that from a use case perspective, if we outsource the management of our data, processing of our data, we are losing our ability to actually own the capabilities of building our own use cases that will benefit our society. So to Peter's point about enabling our government from an AI perspective, if we were to outsource and not be very deliberate on how we actually maintain and store our data, we actually stand the risk of not being able to build solutions that are fit for our South African nations and citizens, right? So if you think about the health space, if all of our data is stored in a foreign capability from a storage perspective, they can almost control the kinds of use cases that we can build because we've outsourced it. And that's where the colonization concept in the AI sovereignty space comes in. So similar to a national conversation, it also applies in the organization and private entities perspective, that there is a reason why a lot of organizations are blocking certain AI platforms purely because they don't know where the data is going. So you could be innocently uploading a document, but you don't know who owns that the capability of processing the data and what they're going to be doing with it. So if you then upload confidential information, you are then exposing your organization to risk, right? So I think we don't speak enough about these. In the process of trying to accelerate adoption and use of these, we must also be very careful about what it is that we want to be exposed and what do we want to own as an enterprise or as a nation as a whole. So for me, those are conversations that we are yet to delve into. And we're almost in a protective state right now, where people on one side want to accelerate adoption, but on the other side, because there's so many unknowns and these conversations are not being held, decision makers are rather put guardrails in place that then also prevent innovation. So it's like a balancing act that we haven't yet gotten right. And through these kinds of platforms, we're able to then define from a sovereign perspective, whether it is through enterprise or state-wise, what do we want to own in the means of production of AI, right? And when we start having those conversations, we're then able to know what to protect and what not to protect. So I'm not sure if that answers your questions or actually opens more questions.
Maybe
opens a million more.
Add to contribute to that question. Maybe so if you look at this from a different perspective, an enterprise or a telco deals with a lot of data, so which means we have to build an infrastructure platform ecosystem which has the right framework to ensure data sovereignty, etc., etc. And what we are also starting to see is that on some use cases, the reason that you don't see scale, it's because it points to data sovereignty issues. So that's why what you will see, and we are also doing that, is that from a multi-cloud perspective, we're driving a lot of how with the big multi-cloud providers, we can collocate in country from a data sovereignty perspective, because then you're ensuring that the use cases that you can deploy. So you can see almost all the multi-cloud, they'll have a POP in the major countries that they operate in, because it drives the whole data sovereignty. And you can start to see that even in AI, there's a lot of AI data centers that are being built in country to allow for that, right? So there's a convergence of a whole lot of things. And the other thing that we see, especially when you start to get into 5G type technologies, private networks, it's important because in AI spaces also you want to allow activities or computing actions that needs to be localized, right? So which means it needs to happen closer to where the customer or is, right? You can't go to the cloud, go somewhere else, because by the time you come back, you'll be late in that response time, right? So that's what helps. And then also what we see is to make impact in certain industries, latency becomes important. On-prem, within a specific environment to respond becomes very critical, right? So there's all these moving parts that are kind of ensuring, and that's why typically a telco is a good partner to fintech ecosystem players, because we've learned a lot on our core business, and what we're doing is that we are taking this learnings and adopting it in terms of how do you allow for scale for use cases that are being built that could be on the borderline of data sovereignty, because you will know that when you work with telcos like us, all those things are thought through to protect the scale of the use cases. Yeah.
Darren, can I just add something to what Peter's saying, which is quite fundamental in appreciating where AI is going and how telcos are actually strong enablers of AI sovereignty. Because of the elements that Peter was talking about, I think we really have not yet to appreciate the role that telco actually is playing in enabling AI sovereignty across all of the different industries. So not only from a fintech perspective, it's almost like an industry of industries when it comes to AI adoption and enablement, whether through the latency, access to data, we also have the skills, right? So that's quite a fundamental concept that I think is going to start playing itself out quite strongly in the coming months.
So thank you. I'm going to ask Kevin something actually, and it's just occurred to me. I had this conversation earlier in the week actually with someone else who's a fintech, who's not necessarily at an enterprise scale yet, but certainly on the right path. And the conversation I had with them was, we want to set up an AI, an LLM, purely based on our own data. We want to have that on-prem, because we don't want access to anything. We want to have, Peter, you'll be able to explain this better than I will, but we want to have that sort of geo security where anyone outside the building, even if they're working remotely, can't log in, because it's central. And we were having this conversation and sort of talking around what they use it for and the analytics and the learnings and what have you. And then as we were sitting having dinner, his phone rang, and it was kind of the office block saying, sorry, that power's gone and the generator hasn't kicked in. That got me thinking, like, wow, okay, so this is kind of a real world situation where if I had an on-prem solution and there was a power cut like this, which unfortunately, is relatively frequent across the continent. Where does that land you, especially if it's sort of mission critical services, that microservices that run on that, whether it be for payments or processing or whatever it may be? Kevin, what would be the answer in that particular case? How would you solve that?
Yeah, that's you like the challenging questions thrown my side, right? Look, Darren, I think resilience is something that we are very, very proud of as well. And this is pretty much based on my earlier comment around our experience as a telco and having the joys of managing this kind of situations over a period of time. Vodacom is about 30 years old in South Africa. So we've had literally over 30 years of experience managing this type of resilience conversations. So that's the first part, right? The second part is that if you look at, yes, we claim that we are resilient, and maybe we can provide those resilient architectures, those resilient infrastructure to our partners. In this case, our fintech customers. But where is the proof point? As in, who can actually go and independently verify that this is actually what we have? So that's why now the ISO certifications also become very, very critical. So we are ISO certified as well, or we have ISO certified infrastructure that is quite resilient. And then, the last one, especially now that you mentioned power, is that power is quite critical in terms of any data infrastructure, which is pretty much our data centers and cloud environments. Power is very, very critical, and this is something that we've been very passionate about over the last couple of years. Looking at how we provide that resilience from a power perspective, and it's not just in South Africa where we've been hit by a lot of power challenges over the last couple of years, which have really improved, and that's probably another topic that Peter will get into to tell you what we're doing in that space to impact a lot of industries, including financial services, but also in other parts of the continent as well. So how do you leverage different sources of power to create that resilience that a lot of our partners and ecosystem partners actually require?
Okay, well, that was a good segue, Peter. Would you like to tell us kind of how you're solving that sort of the infrastructure
I think
challenge?
to take into what Kevin just said, I mean, the power one is interesting. So obviously, as I said, right, we have to self-provide or create a robust data center infrastructure. Data or power becomes very critical. So what we had to do, not only for the data centers, but also our base stations, is that's the birth of the virtual winning platform. So Vodacom worked with our subsidiary we own, Mezzanine, to partner with Eskom and create a virtual winning platform that can allow for independent power producers to wheel their excess energy back into the grid, right? So that's something that we have done. But at the core of it, it came out of a need to do what? Have a resilient network that in the absence of the grid, Eskom, we are able to sustain communication and some critical services. And it's at the core of our data centers so that then we can be able to have sufficient coverage for the clients that we have. I mean, if you look at the clients we have from a data center perspective, you will see that it's mission critical clients that are relying on us to provide that service. So that makes us a natural home for fintechs that are working on those type of solutions, because they can sleep at night knowing that their data is secure.
Which is primary. Ati, may I ask you another question, which is going through my head. So we were talking about data sovereignty, and you're talking about hosting or housing the data domestically in a country. Let's take South Africa as an example. How does that work, though? I'm not talking from a data center side and sort of load balancing and things like that. I'm not talking at a technical level, but how does that work from a large language model perspective? So we have the big US Chinese companies that are developing these models that keep coming out. Every month there's a new update and there's a new model that comes out. If you're housing the data locally, how are you using an LLM to ensure that stays within the borders of the country? Is it a case of actually you having to develop, or Vodacom having to develop their own sort of variation of an OpenAI or Anthropic or something like that? How does that work?
So you'd find that there's multiple ways that can be unlocked. So one of them could be, if you think about in our natural form right now, we are creating data, which is a representation of our cultural and societal norms, right? So what then becomes important is us being able to appreciate that by us capturing my home language is isiXhosa, we need to be very deliberate about what kind of data we collect and where it gets stored. And then from there, we will then be able to build our own large language models that are representation of our societal norms. Why that is important is, one, if we are not deliberate about doing that, we actually stand the chance of actually enabling our societal and even our cultures to become obsolete, because language is a custodian of our cultures. So, in the process of us being able to build the actual large language model capability, we then unlock that skill in-house. So what I see happening, and this is something we started doing in Vodacom, is, as an example, building our own translation models, right, within the environments where our data is stored. So that means that when we are engaging with a Xhosa customer, we are able to translate their language because we have the data within our colloquial concept, be able to service our customers in isiXhosa through using our chatbot capability. So those are the kinds of builds that we are being deliberate about internally to make sure that, because our data is stored in our data warehouses, because we know how secure our data is, we are then able to build our own large language models, and to a point where there's also even opportunities to build telco large language models, because the language and nuances of telco and how we engage as a telco, we actually stand a chance as an industry to build contextual large language models that will service our customers within the telco space. So those are, for me, the trends that I believe we need to start being deliberate about and unlocking as a organization.
You kind of just answered the question I was going to ask you, which I was going to ask all three of you about, your predictions and trends for maybe the next 12 months. I don't think we can look anything beyond that, right? Because we don't have crystal balls. I think had we wound the clock back 2 years, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, or thought we would having this conversation. So, Peter, if I can ask you that question, what do you see trends in the next 12 months? What's your prediction? Again, this is just your opinions, not that of necessarily Vodacom, but your own personal
Yeah,
prediction.
so that question is broad, so I'll try to. I think, because here we're speaking with FinTech specifically. So the Kevin touched on a point around financial inclusion. Technology is an enabler for that, right? So what I foresee is that, in the main, fintech space is around solving problems, and you solve problems at scale. And for you to solve a problem at scale, you need what technology gives you an advantage to get to that point. Remember, in the past, when you want to solve a problem or develop, you need to buy a server, you need to do this and this and this, right? But today, because you are able to access a multi-cloud platform, that is normalizing access for everybody who has the greatest idea that they want to solve for. So a trend that I see is that the fintech space in South Africa in particular is too crowded, because there's a lot of matured, is coming from a matured financial services sector. So which means I'm seeing the emergence of more niche players in that space. But those niche players, in my opinion, for them to succeed, they kind of need to box smart around how they become an ecosystem player. So in my previous life at APSA, so what we were doing, we were looking to create a marketplace whereby fintechs that are potential disruptors, you adopt those products and then you bundle them as a bank's product and offer it to the customers, right? And vice versa, whereby you say, what are the core capabilities that I have as a bank that I can offer to the fintech community as APIs for them to do what they need to do. So I'm seeing that ecosystem play growing in the market between traditional bank, fintech, and telcos, and players that connect those dots will be able to drive the scale, because you need to be solving problems in an ecosystem approach. And if you want to solve problems where you believe as a player you will singularly win in that, I don't think those players are going to succeed. So players that become apply a mindset of ecosystem, co-competition, coexistence, are the ones that are going to create and maximize the value in the value chain. So I'm seeing the emergence of players like that. And that's a space that, as Vodacom, I think we are also wanting to get into and play into that space. And then those players are the areas where you're going to start to see unicorns starting to emerge. And there are already unicorns that are coming traditionally from that market. If I can just sidetrack a little bit. So one, look at the unicorn like Time Bank, right? So if you look at where they started, it's quite an interesting journey because that path, it started at the back of a partnership or a collaboration with a telco for distribution, right? So that's ecosystem. It went to a partnership with a retail distribution player, Pick and Pay. That's an ecosystem play, right? Then you count the years and you look at the acquisitions that they have made to augment their play. You will see its ecosystem. Now there's a partnership and a collaboration with Sanlam, who are coming strong from an insurance space and a book. And that's how they're going to win, which means Sanlam doesn't necessarily need to become a bank because they have that in time. So I'm just using that as an example. So that then, for me, that trend, it shows that a player who took an ecosystem approach has succeeded. And I think the more we take that approach, that's how we're going to succeed, especially for SA-based fintech players, right?
I've spent the last maybe 2 decades talking around this subject, and it probably wasn't until about maybe a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, where that term "fintegration," which Kevin's probably heard a million times. Fintechs were working with the banks, and the banks working with fintechs, and the banks against the fintechs, and the fintechs against the banks, etc., etc. I don't think there's ever been any glue. There's no one
I'm
really
in
been
the
in that
glue.
center of that
You see, now
ecosystem
you
that's kind of
took
pulling
into my passion.
together.
So I think it's an area where I think players like Vodacom, we want to be the glue in that, right? And I think you're going to hear more of that coming. And then what you will see as well is that players that assume that role, that's where you're going to start to see the scale. So I think, Bruce, I'm keen to engage with you further on that topic because I see that as the tipping point of where the scale can be.
I do as well. Now, Kevin, before you answer that question, because I'm going to ask you the same one, but other than I'm probably going to win the wooden spoon at the golf tournament in a couple of weeks' time, what's your prediction? Right? What are you betting on? If you were to say, okay, the market's going to go in this direction. Hearing what Peter and Ati have said about data sovereignty and that sort of integration, that glue, where do you see Vodacom Business, perhaps in 12 months' time, if we're going to come back on in the end of October 2026, what conversations are we going to be having?
I think I have a crystal ball because I think my prediction will actually come to life, right? So over the last couple of years, there's a topic that has actually been very topical across the continent, which is around digital identity. So like I said in the beginning, especially when it comes to AI and data, you need the right trails to actually do anything big in that space, and that's where we come in. And I like what Peter said about the glue actually connecting everything together and creating that ecosystem play that makes sense for all the players in that ecosystem to create value in the market and also generate value for themselves. What I see happening in the fintech space, because without the right, let's say, basic services that are provided at a national or continental level, it's very hard for them to actually do some of these things. And that's why you'll see in some continents or in some markets, there's some data sharing agreements or laws that are being passed, especially in the financial services space. But I think what's really, really critical is that digital identity, let's say, baseline that needs to be created. So I see a lot of governments, a lot of governments, especially in our region, and especially in South Africa, really bringing that to life, and not just digital identity in the sense that you need to sign up and you need a digital record of yourself to prove that you're actually you, but creating that sovereign digital identity where individuals actually have some say or some control on what they want to share with any service provider out there. And in this particular instance, the fintechs. This will definitely create the next level of fintechs where they'll have access to this very, very solid digital identity or sovereign digital identity platform that will help them create some interesting innovations on top of and really drive that kind of innovation that we need to see in the markets that we operate in.
I think that the digital identity topic. It's so broad in itself. I know we were talking sort of, well, perhaps not philosophically, but practically when Ati was talking about data sovereignty, and I think there's a long debate and a lot of questions, not just from South Africa, but across the world. You see what's happening in the UK about, digital IDs and what have you. So I think there's a long way to go. There's definitely some benefits. I think looking at consumer behavior and consumer reaction, just on things like going cashless, certain stores not accepting cash anymore, and the kind of, I don't want to say backlash, but the counter argument against that is something that's our hearts and minds, and an education thing, which I know Vodacom does exceptionally well in terms of educating markets and educating the population in terms of innovation and what's safe and what's not. So, kudos to you, or to you all. I think to finish off, I just wanted to say a very big thank you again to all of you and to your teams. It's no mean feat getting 3 executives from Vodacom together on a call on a Friday afternoon. So a big thank you to everyone. We're very much looking forward to seeing you at the African FinTech Festival and the South African FinTech Awards. And if there's any sort of passing comments, or perhaps if anyone's got any questions around what we've been talking about specifically today, the AI offering, the sort of services that an enterprise or a fintech can procure, where should we direct them, Kevin? Straight to you, or where would you like us to sort of send people?
I think Peter was pointing
Yes,
towards me. Thanks for making me famous again. Yeah, definitely. So I look forward to meeting everyone at the FinTech Festival. We have a couple of other events that are coming up for the FinTechs in the region as well. So I look forward to that. The golf event coming up in about 3 weeks, and of course in 2 weeks' time, the dinner that you're actually planning for them as well in Cape Town. So I look forward to interacting with everyone that has actually been invited or will actually be joining us. And in addition to that, we look forward to just showing you more about some of the exciting things that we will actually be launching in the market over the next couple of days. So really looking forward to this engagement, and of course the Africa FinTech Festival and the awards as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you all very, very much. I'm off to go and practice my golf swing. Otherwise, I'm going to embarrass myself in front of Kevin and the rest of the team. So I'm going to go and do that. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you once again for all your time. And I hope to see you in a few weeks' time in Pretoria.
Good stuff.
Everybody.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
All right. Thank you.